My friend Tim and I had been friends for as long as I could remember. We hung out together all the time. Almost every waking moment, we'd either be playing games in the yard, riding bikes, or just exploring interesting areas of our small town. The freedom we had was unprecedented, especially compared to current times. Our little town seemed untouched by the rest of the world, a fact that my parents reveled in. We'd heard stories about how things were in bigger cities, so we lived up the freedom we had in the safety of our small town. However, we came to learn one year that not all danger comes from expected places. One day, we decided to build a treehouse. Our backyard was a decent size and had one large but desolate tree. Someone had carved something at the base that looked like initials lovers would make, and we thought nothing more of it. Tim and I were climbing it for the millionth time when I had my treehouse epiphany. Tim was more than ready to help me beg my dad to build our fortress of solitude. It would be a sanctuary for our boyish ways, and my dad was more than excited to have a project to do. Besides, any excuse to dodge Mom's to-do list seemed like a good idea to him. So Dad got to work, and I noticed that while he seemed excited to build our treehouse, he got these funny looks from time to time. Whenever I asked, he'd change his expression really quick and say something like, "I'm fine, just thinking about what to do next." Yet, I couldn't shake this feeling that he was lying to me. It didn't take very long for him to finish the treehouse. Oddly, he seemed to get hurt a lot in the process, which was especially weird for him. While he worked hard and diligently, he was also a careful man. Perhaps he felt pressured to make it perfect for us. One night, I got up to use the bathroom and heard muffled talking from my parents' bedroom. Being the stereotypical nosy kid, I tiptoed to their door as close as I would dare. Some words were muffled, but this was the gist of the conversation. "Telling you, there's something weird about that tree. Honey, you're just tired. You've been working on this thing non-stop. You should have taken a break." That's just it. I'm not tired. Every time I went out there, it was like I got this weird surge of energy. You're just excited to... No, that's not it. I'd be dead tired from work, and I'd go out there just to look at the progress. When I would get near the tree, it was like something was calling me, and suddenly I'd feel energized. And don't look at me like that. I'm not crazy. I'm not saying that. Actually, I did feel something weird about that tree when I went out there to check on you. Gives me the creeps, but I can't just stop making the treehouse because I get a weird feeling. The boys are so excited about it. Maybe I'm more tired than I realized. I continued on to the kitchen as I heard my father's footsteps, not wanting to chance him catching me. After getting back to bed, I went over what they said. My dad was not the kind to be superstitious or get weird vibes. It was totally out of his character. But nevertheless, I eventually found myself falling back into a deep sleep. I awoke to a strange sound, softly stirring in my bed. Slipping from my covers, I sauntered about my room until I realized the source of the noise. With a gulp, I approached my window and heard what seemed to be humming. My treehouse was within line of sight, but the sound wasn't coming from there. I looked down and gasped when I saw a group of men circling at the bottom of the tree. A fire roared in the center of kindling, and they chanted in a hushed tone. My throat closed up, and I tried to scream, but something wouldn't let me. "Get away! Help!" I willed my vocal cords to say, but nothing worked. I stumbled out of my room, trying to make it to my parents. My hand touched the doorknob just as I felt something pull me to the ground. I grunted in pain, and looked back to see a horrible creature leering at me, showing rows of serrated teeth from a vertical mouth. It had no eyes, yet I knew it was staring into my very depths. My screams muted. I thrashed to get away from the horrid thing that would surely take me to my ill demise. The thing only dragged me faster, and I felt every bump of the stairs as it dragged me out of the house. The grass burned the bare skin of my back as it pulled me into the backyard. Arms of multiple men grabbed me and bound me with leather rope. They sat me up just in time to witness something that will never leave my memory. Hanging from the ropes of the tree branch were both my parents. Hands held my head still, forcing me to look into their bloated blue faces as they swung back and forth with my treehouse as a backdrop. The creature came back into view, and the men began chanting fervently as it opened its mouth wide and engulfed my head right before. I awoke in a sweat and began crying immediately. Being at the age of 10, I had made the unspoken pact to never get upset at nightmares again. This, however, was an exception. Never had a dream felt so real before. It took my parents a while to calm me down, and it was almost an entire week before I stepped foot near that tree. When Tim and I eventually saw the inside of our tree house, all my thoughts of that horrible dream went to the back burner. My dad had hung up all the decorations we had planned, and it was nothing less than awesome. I practically jumped off the ladder to hug my smiling dad. As he hugged me back and smiled, his eyes darted upward to the treehouse, and I saw a glimmer of dread in them. Tim and I spent every moment in the treehouse together. One of the first things we figured out was how to communicate without my parents knowing. If I was ever confined to my room, he would sneak over to the treehouse and talk to me through a tin can phone. This might sound more dubious than it really was, but our backyard lined up with his backyard, so it's not like he was getting far from the safety of his home. He'd go to his backyard to play and slip through the fence to get to the treehouse. Whether I was in trouble or our parents thought we needed a little away time, we had a system to work around. And it was a good thing we did, because 3 months later I got the flu. Ted and I spent more time than ever talking through the tin can phone, and we even rigged up a clothesline with a small bucket so we could share video games, comics, and anything else you can think of. My mom would kill me if she knew we were doing it. She was really concerned that I would get him sick. We, of course, didn't care because I needed new things to do being stuck in my room. One night, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a sound coming from the tin can. I dismissed it at first, since it would pick up things like squirrels or the wind if it was a drafty day. But it persisted, and I brought the tin can to my ear. "Hey, Tim." There was an eerie silence on the other end, but I swear I could hear movement. So I tugged on the clothesline, hoping to rattle the bucket to get his attention. I held the line for a moment until I felt a familiar tug back. I picked up the tin can and said, "Hey, what are you doing in there?" "Sorry," I heard Tim whisper. "I was trying to be quiet so your parents didn't hear me. I have something for you." I watched as the bucket slowly came into view and held out my hands to grab it. Strangely, I noticed that there was no light coming from the treehouse. He really went into stealth mode for this one, I thought, as I unclipped the bucket. Placing the metal container down as softly as I could, I reached in and pulled out a Ouija board. I gasped and quickly put it back in the bucket. My parents had warned me to never mess with them. Whether you believe in spirits and demons or not, you could open yourself up to some bad stuff. It simply wasn't a risk worth taking. Tim, why'd you send me this? I said, my harsh tone evident. You don't want to play with it? Tim said. No, those things can be dangerous. Plus, I'll get in huge trouble for messing with them. Oh, come on. It'll be fun. I stopped for a second, thinking of how weird this was. Tim was definitely acting weird. And now that I thought about it, he was never interested in Ouija boards. Why would he suddenly want to send one to me? I couldn't stand the idea of getting in trouble for some stupid lapse of judgment he had. I immediately clipped the bucket back to the line and began feeding it back to him. When I saw it had made it into the treehouse, I sat back on my bed. Here, take it. I don't want it here. Tim said nothing back. Tim? There was an eerie silence, and then I heard the familiar sound of the bucket being unclipped and set down. I tried calling him a couple more times, but he wouldn't respond. Yet, I knew he was there. Despite his silence, I could faintly hear labored breathing. Tim, stop. You're creeping me out. Maybe you should go back home. My pulse quickened at his repeated silence. Then the fact that it was very late dawned on me. Tim never came here after 10 o'clock, and his weird behavior coupled with that made me very uncomfortable. One more thing before I go, Tim whispered suddenly, making me jump. I heard the squeak of the clothesline moving, and I looked out the window. This went on for a moment, but the bucket wasn't coming my way. Hey, what are you sending? I said into the tin can, but was again met with an unnerving silence. I sat back on my bed, then felt something small drop on my shoulder. It was wet, so I looked at the clothesline and noticed something looked off. The light from my bedside lamp was too low to illuminate it, so I grabbed a flashlight. Shining the light on the clothesline, I suppressed a scream when I saw the clothesline was covered in blood. I had to wait a second to calm myself down. Whatever game Tim was playing, I needed him to stop. Just as I stood up to look out my window again, I heard the familiar sound of my doorknob turning. My heart leapt into my chest as I turned. Honey? The sound of my mom's voice echoed into the room. She peered in, and I instantly felt relief. I'm awake. You have a visitor. Cold needles pricked my skin as I saw Ted walk into the room, a puzzled look on his face. Josh? You're not in the treehouse? A blanket of icy needles made me visibly shiver as I turned to look back at the treehouse. There was a light on inside, illuminating the face of a ghastly creature covered in dark smoke. He smiled back at me and waved a bloody hand. I rolled to the floor to avoid the creature's gaze. I felt like I would go insane if I looked at it any longer. Josh, what's the matter? My mom rushed over to me. I don't remember much about the rest of that night, but I do remember stuttering out the entirety of what had happened. Apparently, Tim saw a shadowy figure climb into the treehouse. He begged his parents to bring him over to see if I was in my room, so that we'd know if it was a prowler. My dad had rushed outside with a gun, but found nothing except the bucket with an Ouija board still inside. He promptly burned it. My mom didn't tell me until later, but they researched the history of our home and found out there used to be a cult that lived in our house. They used the tree in our backyard for ritual sacrifices, some of which included hanging people from one of the tree limbs. The next day, my dad destroyed the treehouse, and we never played in that backyard again. For years, my dad swore he heard chanting and an occasional scream from that awful tree. He took it one step further and cut the tree down. Even then, he would sometimes hear the rhythmic creak of wood as if something was swaying to and fro from a phantom limb. Back when we lived in that house, we were really isolated, with no neighbors nearby, except for the area where big trucks passed by, but it was within walking distance. I remember one time when I was put to bed early by my mom, and I got surprised when my dad couldn't wake her up. He tried everything, but she just wouldn't wake up, and chaos broke out in our house. Strange things kept happening, and we eventually realized that we were being mocked, which is what Lamat means. I also remember the face of an old lady whom we didn't know. Her hair was messy and white, and she was short. She was intensely staring at my mom at that time, and my grandma saw her too. She even asked the guard who that lady was, but when they looked back, she was gone. After that, I was traumatized by what I saw and experienced, and it just didn't feel right to stay in that place. Eventually, we had to leave, and my dad found a piece of land and a new house. I was in 7th grade at the time, and that was when I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. At first, I didn't even know what it was, because it had never happened to me when I was younger. It was only after we moved out of our old house that I started experiencing sleep paralysis regularly. Do you think there's a spiritual explanation for all of this? Or was it just my trauma response to what happened in our old house? Because it's not just that one incident we experienced. There were many other things that we just brushed off as our imagination. Last summer, me and my girlfriend decided to book an Airbnb for a weekend getaway. We found this cute little cottage nestled in the countryside, surrounded by fields and forests. It looked like the perfect place to relax and unwind. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. The host greeted us warmly and showed us around the cottage. It was cozy and quaint, with rustic furniture and a fireplace. We were excited to spend a few days there. The first night went by without any issues. We cooked dinner, watched some movies, and cuddled up by the fire. It was romantic and peaceful, exactly what we were hoping for. But then, things started to get strange. On the second night of our peaceful getaway, something scary happened. We woke up suddenly because we heard a strange scratching noise coming from outside the cottage. At first, we thought it was just some animal messing around. We tried to go back to sleep, but the scratching kept going, getting louder and scarier. Feeling really scared, I went outside with a flashlight to see what was going on. I looked around nervously, trying to see if anything was wrong. And then I saw it. There, in the dim light of my flashlight, was a person standing outside the window. They looked really scary, and it was obvious they didn't belong there. I quickly closed the curtains to hide us from this stranger. My girlfriend woke up, terrified, as I told her what happened. We didn't know what to do. We thought about leaving, but we were too scared to make a move. So instead, we locked up everything and stayed inside the cottage, hoping whoever it was would go away. The scratching noise kept going all night, making it impossible for us to sleep. We felt really scared, not knowing what was going to happen. As soon as it was light outside, we packed up our things and left the Airbnb without looking back. We were still really shaken up and had no idea what had happened. When we told Airbnb about what had happened, they didn't seem to care much. They offered us a refund, but it didn't make us feel any better. To this day, we still don't know who was outside that window or why they were watching us. It's a chilling experience that we'll never forget, and it's made us think twice about booking another Airbnb in the future. It was around midnight when my phone pinged with an Uber request. I'm a night shift driver, and while I've had my share of odd passengers, nothing could prepare me for this. I pulled up to the pickup location, an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, the lawn overgrown. Just as I was about to cancel the ride, a woman stepped out from the shadows. She was wearing a tattered dress, her face pale and gaunt. I tried not to judge. Maybe she was just down on her luck. She slid into the back seat without a word. "Hi, where to?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. She handed me a slip of paper. On it was an address I didn't recognize. I punched it into the GPS and started driving. The whole time, she didn't say a word. I glanced in the rearview mirror every now and then, and every time, she was staring right at me. Her eyes were unnaturally wide, unblinking. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Halfway through the trip, the GPS started acting up. It kept rerouting me through smaller and smaller roads until we were on a dirt path cutting through dense woods. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Hey, are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. She didn't respond, just kept staring. I stopped the car, heart pounding. "Miss, I need to know where we're going." Suddenly, she leaned forward, her breath cold against my neck. "Just keep driving," she whispered. The voice didn't sound right. It was too raspy, too old for her youthful appearance. I started driving again, faster this time, desperate to get out of those woods. The path was getting narrower, the trees closing in. Panic was setting in when finally the GPS announced we had reached the destination. There was nothing but darkness ahead. No house, no lights, just the oppressive silence of the forest. I turned to tell her we were here, but the back seat was empty. My heart stopped. I hadn't heard the door open or close. I got out, shining my phone's flashlight around. There were no footprints, no sign anyone had ever been there. Trembling, I checked the car. It was empty, save for the slip of paper on the back seat. I picked it up, and underneath the address was a note in the same handwriting. "Thank you for the ride. I've been dead for 20 years." I jumped back into the car and sped out of there, not stopping until I was back in town. I reported it to the police, but they found nothing. No record of the address, no sign of the woman. To this day, I don't take rides from the outskirts, and I always check my back seat before driving at night. So let me tell you about this Airbnb stay my friend and I had. We were heading to a music festival and decided to book a place nearby instead of camping out. Found this decent-looking spot online, not too far from the venue, and the price was all right. So, we get there, and it's this old house, kind of spooky looking, but we figure, hey, it's just for a couple of nights, no big deal. The host seemed nice enough, gave us the keys, showed us around, nothing out of the ordinary. First night goes by, nothing weird. But the next day, things start getting strange. We notice weird noises coming from the attic, like shuffling and thumping. We brush it off at first, thinking maybe it's just the house settling or something. But then, things start disappearing. Small stuff at first, like a pair of sunglasses or a phone charger. We figure we're just being forgetful, but it keeps happening, and we can't find any of the stuff we've lost. Then, one night, we hear footsteps in the hallway outside our room. My friend goes to check it out, but there's nobody there. We start getting seriously freaked out at this point. Next night, we're both woken up by this loud banging coming from the basement. It sounds like someone's throwing stuff around down there. We debate calling the cops, but we're not sure if it's just some weird plumbing issue or what. Finally, on our last night there, we wake up to find all our stuff piled up in the middle of the living room. Clothes, bags, everything. And written on the wall in what looks like blood is the word leave. We didn't waste any time getting out of there. Packed up our stuff and never looked back. Never did find out what was going on in that house, but we sure as hell weren't sticking around to find out. Later, we found out from other guests who stayed there that they had similar experiences. Some claimed they saw shadowy figures moving around at night, while others said they heard whispering voices when no one else was around. It was like something straight out of a horror movie. Needless to say, we left a scathing review on the Airbnb website, warning others to steer clear of that place. But the scariest part? The host never responded to any of our messages or attempted to address our concerns. It was like they were trying to sweep it all under the rug. To this day, my friend and I still shudder whenever we think about that Airbnb stay. It was a lesson learned the hard way. Always trust your gut instincts and never underestimate the power of a creepy house. I've experienced sleep paralysis quite a few times, but what I experienced one day made me believe in paranormal stuff. I was 12 when this happened. My family usually has open discussions on paranormal activities and doesn't try to deny it. But I don't know if it was fear, but I always denied it, saying science doesn't prove it. Although I have experienced a ton of hauntings, because the street I used to live on had 10 plus suicide cases and 2 murder cases all within 2 years. But science, I said. I have made a habit of covering my face with a blanket while sleeping, and I can't explain how, but my mom always senses it when I'm having sleep paralysis, and she moves my body. Now I wonder if it was my mom every time. As usual, I woke up one morning, my face covered with a blanket, but I noticed I couldn't move my body. Sleep paralysis scares the shit out of me, even though I've had it multiple times. I was sweating, and it was getting extremely hard to breathe because of the blanket situation. I really thought that was my last day. A baby-sized hand touched my forehead. It was warm. The sunlight from my window was falling on me, so I could see the clear shadow of a tiny hand from inside the blanket. It slowly moved away. It broke the paralysis, thankfully. I was searching everywhere for what it could have been. I thought maybe it was my younger brother, but he wasn't in my room. His hands are bigger than mine. What really creeps me out is that my mom or grandmother doesn't deny anything I tell them. They focus more on the solution to help me avoid stuff like this, but never gave me a logical explanation. Me and a couple of buddies decided to take a road trip down south. We booked this Airbnb for a weekend stay in a small town that seemed peaceful enough on the website. The pictures showed a cozy little cottage with a quaint garden out back. Seemed like the perfect spot for a relaxing getaway, right? Wrong. When we got there, the place looked just like the pictures, but something felt off from the get-go. The host, let's call him Tom, greeted us with a forced smile and gave us a quick tour. Everything seemed fine at first, until he mentioned that the basement was off limits. He said it was just storage, and we didn't need to bother with it. That set off some alarm bells, but we brushed it off and settled in. As the night rolled in, things started to take a creepy turn. We heard strange noises coming from the basement, like faint whispers and shuffling sounds. Every time we mentioned it to Tom, he just brushed it off. saying it must be the old pipes or something, but we weren't buying it. Then came the second night. We were chilling in the living room, watching some TV, when we heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy footsteps, like someone was stomping around. We called out, thinking it was Tom, but there was no answer. We decided to check it out ourselves, but when we reached the top of the stairs, the footsteps stopped. No one was there. That's when things got really freaky. We started noticing weird symbols painted on the walls, hidden in the corners of the rooms. Symbols we didn't recognize, but they gave us all the creeps. We tried to leave, but the doors were all locked from the outside. It was like we were trapped in there. But the worst part? We found a hidden door in the back of one of the closets. It led to a secret room in the basement, the one Tom told us to stay away from. And what we found in there, I still get chills just thinking about it. It was like a shrine, covered in candles and strange objects. And in the center, there was a freaking altar with dried blood on it. We didn't waste a second. We busted out of there, called the cops, and got the heck out of Dodge. Turns out, Tom had a dark past and was involved in some messed up stuff. They never found him, but they shut down his Airbnb for good. My wife, Mia, and I were driving cross-country. It was our first attempt at the Great American Road Trip. Mia and I rented a small RV, more of a camper than a full-blown RV. We packed up a couple suitcases with plenty of room for any souvenirs, and we hit the dusty trail. We started our journey on the Mother Road, Route 66, driving south from Chicago until we connected to I-70 and shot straight west through Missouri. The goal was to see those parts of the country we had never seen before, stopping anywhere that seemed interesting. From the plains of Kansas up through the Badlands of Wyoming and South Dakota. In Missouri, we saw the world's largest cap gun. In Kansas, we visited the Evel Knievel Museum and the world's largest belt buckle. We love all those kitschy tourist trap places. Eventually, we made it to Colorado, and after a few hours more of driving through amber waves of grain, we saw them, the Rocky Mountains. We made an exit and headed north through the winding mountain highways. The Rockies were gorgeous. Snow-capped in the middle of summer, some of the peaks pierced through the white, fluffy clouds. We saw a sign that read, "Traffic tunnel, 3 miles." A little further, and sure enough, there it was, a large tunnel bored directly through the mountain in front of us. A large sign read, "Pike Tunnel, longest traffic tunnel in the nation. Please turn your headlights on now." "How long is it?" asked Mia. "That's what she said," I quipped. But she was right. There was no information beyond the detail that this was the longest tunnel in the nation. "Can't be more than a mile or 2, I said, as I watched the little white car ahead of us slip into the darkness. A moment later, we joined it. The tunnel was lit by fluorescence that gave everything a greenish-yellow tinge. On the left-hand side was a raised walkway behind a railing for maintenance access. Initially, I was struck by the incredible amount of work that went into the construction of this man-made marvel. "We're under 1 million tons of Rocky Mountain right now," I said. "How many years before this caves in?" Mia responded. I shot her a look. "Let's save the cave-in talk until we're out on the other side. I'm just saying, nature will take this back eventually," she continued. I scanned the empty road ahead of us. "Where did the other car go?" I asked. We were now alone in the tunnel. No cars ahead of us, nor behind us. "Huh. They must have sped off ahead. Maybe they're scared of a cave-in." My Spotify playlist had stopped playing. Mia looked at the phone. no cell service. She turned on the radio and spun the dial only to find static. "You're not going to be able to pick up a station in here," I said. She turned the volume down. "Just wanted to check. If only we had some CDs. This tunnel really keeps going." "I would have thought we'd be through it by now," I replied. I looked at the RV's odometer, 45,600 miles. I picked up speed. I wanted to try and catch up to the little white car. Up until this point, the tunnel was a straight shot, but now the tunnel started to curve to the right. It may have been my imagination, but it also felt as though we were descending. Mia felt it too, and she started to get antsy. "Where did that other car goes? How long is this tunnel?" There was an urgency in her voice. I was getting nervous. Claustrophobia was not usually a problem for me, but when I looked down at the odometer and I saw that it had gone up by 3 miles, my mind began to wander to unsettling places. We were descending in altitude. I could feel it. I could see a slope in the lights on the ceiling and the railing of the maintenance walkway. I could feel a pressure in my head, and I was getting cold. "Could you grab me a Coke from the back, Mia?" I couldn't have Mia getting anxious. That would only start a chain reaction and make me freak out, which would then make her freak out. She unbuckled and ducked into the back of the RV to where we had a cooler stocked with drinks and food. Just as she stepped into the back, I saw something. There, standing on the side of the road, was a man wearing a reflective safety vest and a hard hat. He was waving to me as I passed him by. Something about him looked strange. I watched him in the side view mirror as we passed, and he was still watching the RV, still waving at the back of our vehicle as he faded into the distance. Mia reappeared from the back of the RV, Coke in hand. She popped it and handed it to me. "You look worried." "I'm fine." I smiled and took a sip of the Coke. "Eric, slow down." I slammed on the brakes as I saw what made Mia scream. In the road in front of us was a roadblock. 2 reflective traffic sawhorses blocked both lanes of the tunnel. Beyond the roadblock, the lights of the tunnel were dark. There was nothing but a void of blackness. Standing in front of the roadblock was another man wearing a reflective vest and a hard hat. Only this time, his hard hat had a light on top, which obscured his face. We came to a jolting stop. I turned to Mia. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "It's a cave-in, isn't it?" "God, I hope not." I rolled down the window, leaned out and yelled to the man in the hard hat. "Hey, what's going on?" The man was about 5 yards away. He took 2 steps towards us and then raised a hand to his mouth and yelled, "Just doing some maintenance." "How long is it going to take?" I yelled back. The man made a hand gesture as if he didn't hear me. "How long is it going to take?" I called again. He made the same gesture. I unbuckled my seatbelt and grabbed the door release. "What are you doing?" Mia asked. "I gotta know what's going on." "Eric, just stay here. It might not be safe." "I'll be just a second," I said. I pushed the door open and stepped down from the RV. "Stay in your vehicle," the man yelled. He took a couple steps towards me with his hand out telling me to stop. "What's the holdup?" I shouted. The man was a bit closer now, but I still couldn't see his face through the shining light on his helmet. "Please stay in your vehicle," he shouted. There was something off about him. Then I heard it. A scream or something rolled from deep in the tunnel. The worker turned and looked into the darkness. Then he ran past the barricades, and soon all we could see of him was the light on his helmet. The light disappeared a moment later. What the hell was that? Is someone hurt? Mia asked. I have no idea, I said. Should we do something? Mia asked. I just sat there and watched the pitch-black tunnel in front of me. I had no idea what to tell her. I checked the side view mirrors. There was still nobody behind us. Where are the other cars? I asked. They must have gotten through before the roadblock. Or maybe they caused the roadblock, Mia replied. I saw another worker a little way back. We could try to go back and talk to him. We'd be going straight into any oncoming cars. There's a maintenance walkway. We didn't pass him that long ago. We can probably catch him on foot. Maybe we should just wait for the guy to come back. She reached over and grabbed my arm. I squeezed her hand. She was right. I looked out at the tunnel ahead of us. I turned on the RV's high beams, but all I could see beyond the roadblock was more tunnel and more road. I checked my phone. Unsurprisingly, there was no service still. We waited, but the man never came back. It's been 20 minutes, Mia said. How come there hasn't been another car behind us? I was having the same thought. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out. I looked back at the road behind us. It went back about 200 yards before curving out of sight. There was no sign of that first worker I saw on the maintenance walkway. I looked at the roadblock ahead of us and clicked on the RV's high beams. There was nothing beyond the roadblock but more tunnel. It didn't look like it was under construction, just very dark. I think we should keep going, I said. What about the roadblock? We'll move those sawhorses out of the way and just drive past, I said, as I opened my door. Mia looked at me. Then she cast her eyes to the dark tunnel ahead of us. I knew she was processing the same limited options that I was. Driving backwards would be a huge risk in the instance of another car finally coming along. Getting out and walking would take God knows how long. We could have driven 10 miles at this point. Forward was our best option. Let's do it, Mia said. We jumped out and quickly pulled the two sawhorses out of the right lane. I pulled the RV up past the barriers. Then we jumped out again and put the sawhorses back where they were. We didn't need another car to come barreling through. We were finally moving again, slowly. It was pitch black, save for the high beams of the RV. We crept forward at around 15 miles per hour. As the tunnel turned and twisted, my eyes started to play tricks on me. I kept seeing shapes at the furthest point of the tunnel. I kept seeing something standing just at the end of the next bend, but as we roll forward, there was nothing there. Where are the workers? Mia asked. I don't know. I was done rationalizing. This was all wrong. Traffic tunnels are never this long. My mind started to wander to all the road trip urban legends I'd read about. The killer in the back seat, the disappearing gas station, the pale man in the cornfield. Did we stumble into some strange outlier location? An in-between point on the endless roads that cross this country? Then I saw it. Look! A person! Thank God! Mia shouted. As we rounded a curve in the tunnel, a group of maintenance workers entered our view. The three of them stood on the left side of the road, behind two more sawhorses topped with flashing lights. Two of them faced towards us. The third was facing the other two. The one with his back to us wore a light on his hard hat. Was this the same guy we saw earlier? How did he get this far away? I approached slowly and rolled down the window. Hey! You left us waiting back there! I yelled. There was no response. In fact, all three men were completely silent, and it was hard to tell in the flashing light of the sawhorses, but they looked to be standing completely still. Hello? I yelled again. I pushed open my door and stepped out onto the pavement. Eric, wait? I held up a finger to Mia. Just a second. I slowly stepped towards the three men. Hello? No response. The bright lights of the sawhorses obscured their faces. I kept moving closer. Hey, what's going on? Then I saw it. Their faces, they were plastic. In front of me stood three mannequins. I backed away toward the RV. Then I turned and walked hurriedly to the vehicle. I was seriously freaked out, but I didn't want to alarm Mia. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. They're mannequins, I said. What? They're mannequins. Why? What? I don't know. I looked back over at the three figures, and my blood ran cold. The hard hat mannequin had somehow turned around to face us. All three figures appeared to be watching us now. Then we heard it. A loud resonant banging on the side, and then the roof of the RV. What the hell was that? Mia whispered. We listened, holding our breath. Then, a shuffling sound. Something was moving on or in the RV. Stay here, I said. I got up. Eric, wait! I moved to the back of the RV. It was dark. I went for a drawer in the kitchenette space and pulled out a flashlight. I moved to the rear of the RV, the bedroom. My flashlight illuminated an empty room. Whoever is back here, I have a gun. A shitty bluff. But I didn't see anything. I shone the light out of the windows of each side of the RV. Nothing. Then I heard it. A shuffling sound from right above me. On the roof of the RV, staring through the skylight, was a woman with vacuous black eyes and a dead smile. Her stringy black hair dangled down towards me, casting thin black shadows across her horrible pale face. Mia, drive! Fast! I screamed. Mia jumped over to the driver's seat, shifted into gear, and stomped on the gas. The RV was clunky, but it could move when it needed to. We lurched forward and I fell back. I trained my flashlight up onto the skylight again, and the woman was gone. I scrambled to my feet and looked out of the side windows. Did Mia shake her off? There was no sign of the woman. I moved to the passenger seat, breathing heavily and sweating. What happened? She asked, keeping the RV at a steady 50 miles per hour. There was a woman on the roof, I said flatly. I realized now that I was in a kind of shock. A woman? Her eyes were black. Mia just looked at me, then back at the tunnel ahead of us. There's something wrong with this tunnel, I whispered. Mia pointed at the road ahead. Look. I looked out at the tunnel. There were more mannequins. A lot more mannequins. They were positioned on both sides of the road. They were all facing us, and even though I never saw them move, when I looked in the side view mirror, they were somehow still facing us, turning to watch us as we drove past, watching without eyes. Just keep driving, I said. As we drove on, the mannequins crowded the sides of the road more and more. There were thousands of them. Eventually, they were so close that some of their outstretched arms hit the side of the RV. They were closing in on us, squeezing our path forward. One stood in the middle of the road. I don't think I can get around it. Run it over. Don't stop. The RV smashed into the mannequin. Its head shot forward and bounced against the windshield, and the vehicle shuddered as it rolled over the body. Soon there were two in the road, then three. I could see where this was going. Pretty soon there would be too many for the RV to ram through. But God damn it, we were going to get through as many as we could. Speed up, Mia. Crash. The sound was surreal, smashing into mannequin after mannequin at nearly 60 miles per hour. Hands, legs, heads, and torsos flew. The windshield cracked. The RV shuddered and screamed, and eventually slowed down, despite the screaming engine. I'm certain the axle was jammed up with lifeless, plastic body parts. Eventually, we came to a stop. "She won't move," Mia said. She pressed on the gas, but it was no use. The RV just rocked a little bit. "Try reverse." She shifted and pressed on the gas. We got some decent movement before running into another jam. "Should we get out and look?" Mia asked. "I'll go," I said, as I grabbed the flashlight and popped the passenger door. Mia unbuckled her seatbelt. "We'll go together." We stumbled out of the RV on the passenger side. It was like stepping into hell. Countless, lifeless faces stared out at us from the darkness. The only light came from the headlights of the RV and my flashlight. We clumsily made our way along the side of the RV. The ground was littered with mannequin pieces. I thought to myself, if we could get a couple yards cleared out behind the rear tires, we might be able to back out and get enough momentum to reverse all the way back out of here. Instead, when we got to the back of the RV, my stomach flipped and my heart sank. I was expecting to see a trail of flattened mannequins. Instead, the RV was now surrounded by thousands of perfectly intact mannequins standing at attention, as if their ranks had somehow been replenished after our vehicular assault. "This is impossible." She started to cry. I held her close. "We'll keep moving," I said. "It will never end. The tunnel makes no sense. It only curves one direction." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This whole time the tunnel has only been curving to the right. It would sometimes straighten out or go left for a few yards, but before too long we were curving to the right again. We've either been driving in circles or spiraling downwards. So we'll go back the way we came and hope we're not going in circles," I said. We had been driving for hours at this point. Walking back out the way we came would take days. But now that I thought about it, Mia was right. We'd only been curving to the right. This tunnel seemed to be very gradually taking us downwards into the earth. Going forward would not get us any closer to escape. "We'll need food from the RV," Mia said. I nodded, and we stumbled our way back to the front of the RV, the mannequins' lifeless faces watching us the whole time. I stepped up to the passenger door and nearly fell back when I looked through the window. What I saw were two mannequins sitting in the driver's and passenger's seat. How they got in there, I have no idea, but what really made my blood run cold was that they were dressed exactly like Mia and I. They wore identical sets of clothes. The one in the passenger seat had my same New Order t-shirt and black jeans. The one in the driver's seat had Mia's green striped sweater and denim shorts. Their plastic faces stared out through the shattered windshield at the endless crowd of mannequins staring back at them. Mia stepped up and saw the uncanny display. I pulled myself up into the RV and slowly stepped around my mannequin doppelganger. I avoided looking into its face, but I swear I could feel it watching me as I stumbled around it. Mia followed, and we made our way into the back of our dark RV. Luckily, we had just stocked our cooler full of deli meat and water not long after crossing the Colorado state line. I handed Mia the flashlight and pulled open the cooler. I filled a backpack full of food and water. I turned and saw them. My mannequin double had somehow moved. It was standing in the aisle watching us. Mia's doppelganger was still seated in the driver's seat, but had turned to peer back at us with its eyeless gaze. Mia saw the look in my eyes and turned. She screamed when she saw them and backed into me. I put my arm around her, and we stood there a moment, letting our skyrocketing heart rates return to earth. "Let's get out of here," I said. I slid the backpack onto my shoulders. Mia joined me at the door. I looked into her eyes. "Are you ready?" She nodded. The look on her face killed me. She was terrified. I'm sure the look on my face was similar. I opened the door and we stepped out. We again stumbled to the back of the RV. Once we were clear of the RV and all the crushed mannequin body parts, it became easier to find footing, though weaving through an endless crowd of lifeless people was a slow process. It was pitch black. Without the flashlight, we wouldn't be able to see a foot in front of us. As I walked, the beam of light created the illusion of movement in the crowd. At least I hoped it was an illusion. The limbs of the mannequins seemed to stretch and turn, but the only sound was that of Mia and I shuffling our way through the crowded tunnel. Things went on like this for what felt like hours. Mia and I were sweating and aching. I was about to suggest we stop and rest, but then I saw it and I froze. Out in the crowd, beyond rows of blank faces, I saw a pale face, black hair, and a dead smile. I saw two vacuous eyes staring right at me. "Mia, do you see her?" I whispered. "See who?" I slowly raised my arm and pointed. It was the woman, or whatever it was, that stared back at me through the skylight on the roof of the RV. "Oh my God," Mia squeaked. I could see now that the pale-faced woman was tall, a few inches taller than the mannequins. As I pointed, she stared back at me with that terrible grin. "What do we do?" Mia whispered. I raised the flashlight and pointed it right at the pale-faced woman. I thought maybe this would scare her off. I was wrong. The light only made her appear more unsettling as she stared back, unflinchingly. "What do you want?" I yelled. She only stared back at me. She was as still as the mannequins. "We have to keep going," I whispered. Mia didn't respond. Her body was tense as she held on to me. "We've come this far. We can't turn back again," I continued. I pulled Mia's hand, and we continued on our way through the mannequins, keeping the distance between us and her as wide as possible. As we moved past, she kept watching us. Though her movements were imperceptible to us, her eyes never left us. Like one of those portraits whose eyes appear to watch you no matter where you stand. Finally, we got far enough that she was out of sight. But the thought of her being somewhere behind us only unsettled me further, and I quickened our pace. As the hours wore on, there was no sign of the pale-faced woman, and the crowd of mannequins began to thin out. They still populated the tunnel from one end to the other, but there was more space between them, allowing Mia and I to walk more freely. The mannequins on the maintenance walkway on the side of the tunnel seemed to thin out as well, and I decided it would give us a better vantage if we were walking up there. I helped Mia climb up the railing that bordered the walkway. Then I climbed up behind her. The walkway was elevated 3 or 4 feet above the roadway. We could easily see over the heads of the mannequins in both directions. There was, of course, no end to the tunnel in sight. We kept walking. The mannequins continued to thin out, but they were different now. There were mannequins dressed as maintenance workers again, but also mannequins dressed as families and businessmen. There was even a group of mannequin nuns standing in a single file line, heads bowed in prayer. Needless to say, we passed none of this on the way into the tunnel. I was feeling very hopeless that we were going to be able to find our way out. I was far beyond speculating how this was at all possible. It's not possible. And even if it were, there is no good reason for someone to do this to us. The only explanation was the supernatural. Then I saw her. Rather, I saw them. Arranged in the middle of the tunnel was a circle of mannequins with long black hair and tattered cloth. They looked exactly like the pale-faced woman, minus any facial features. I kept a close watch on them as we passed to make sure they didn't start following us. "A door!" Mia shouted. Mia pointed a few paces ahead of her. There was a door leading into the wall of the tunnel. We ran towards it. Mia grabbed the handle, turned it, and pulled. It was heavy, and Mia had to brace her foot on the wall to get it moving. The metal door groaned, as if it hadn't been opened in years. Finally, it was open enough to see past. It was a hallway. It went out about 5 yards, then turned right at a 90-degree angle. The strangest part was the design of the hallway. It wasn't cement or pavement like the tunnel. The walls were wood-paneled, and the floor was covered in a thick carpet, like a house from the 1970s. "I say we see where this takes us," Mia said. There was no reason to disagree, but I wasn't going to get us trapped in there. I opened up my backpack and took out a water bottle. I opened it and handed it to Mia. She drank half, then I drank the other half. I slowly closed the door, shoving the empty water bottle in the crack to keep it from closing all the way. I turned to Mia. "Okay, let's go." We slowly made our way down the quiet hallway. We got down to where the hallway cornered to the right, and that's when we heard it. I whipped around. The door had closed behind us. I ran back to it and tried to push it open, but it was no use. There was no way it closed on its own. Someone had to have removed the water bottle. Our path had been chosen for us. There was no turning back. We continued down the hallway. We turned right. The hallway continued, then turned right again. That should have led us right back to the tunnel, but it didn't. This part of the hallway went on far longer than was possible without running into the tunnel. Then it turned right again. It went on like this. Sometimes a section of the hallway was 20 feet long. Sometimes it was 20 yards long. Sometimes it was 3 feet long. But it always turned to the right. At first, it was a relief to be somewhere other than the cold, dark tunnel. But the hallway very quickly became claustrophobic, and before too long, I heard someone walking behind us. We had stopped to take a break, and I heard a third pair of footsteps on the carpet coming from behind us. I backtracked to the last corner. I was terrified as I slowly peeked around the corner, tense and waiting to see the vacuous eyes and inky black hair of the pale-faced woman. But there was nothing there. I wasn't about to backtrack any further. "There was no one there," I whispered. Mia slumped against the wall and slid down to the carpet. "I think I need to rest," she said. I put my backpack down on the ground for Mia to use as a pillow. She laid her head down and was passed out in seconds. I had no idea how long we had been walking at this point. I stood leaning against the wall. My body was telling me to rest, but I couldn't risk falling asleep. I had to keep watch. I knew she was following us. I took in the details of the hallway for the first time. The carpet was a dull brown, and the walls a cheap wood paneling. The hanging lighting fixtures were shaded by stained glass, something you might see in an old diner. Who built this place? Did someone pick out the carpet and the lighting fixtures? Did a team of workers blast these tunnels into the earth? Or has this place always existed? Was this purgatory? I began to feel dizzy. I was panicking. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I slumped to the floor and tried to slow my breathing. I closed my eyes. I shot up in a panic. I had fallen asleep while I was meant to be keeping watch. I snapped to my feet and looked around. Mia was still asleep on my backpack. Then I noticed that the hallway had changed. A few paces away, There was now a plain wooden door in the wall. I slowly approached it. I put my ear to the door, and I could hear what sounded like TV static and the low murmur of voices. I discreetly grabbed the door handle and turned it slowly. I felt the latch bolt clear, and I carefully cracked the door just enough to peek inside. It was dark, so it took a second for me to register what I was seeing. I saw a small boardroom. A long table in the center was surrounded by seated men in suits. At the end of the table stood another man next to an old CRT TV that was playing static. This was the only source of light in the room, and all the men around the table were turned towards the TV. Suddenly, the screen flickered from static to a solid dark background, and some warped New Age-style music began playing. Then the words appeared on the screen that terrified me like nothing else before. In plain text, the words read, "You will lose her." I froze as I knew these words were meant for me. I watched with terror as the men seated around the table slowly turned toward me in unison. They were mannequins. The TV screen then clicked off, and they continued staring at me as I could barely make out their forms through the near-pitch darkness. I quickly pulled the door shut and whipped around to look at Mia. I had a horrible feeling of dread that when I turned around, she would be gone, like the message on the TV promised. "Eric? What are you doing?" Mia was leaning up and staring at me. Thank God. There was Mia, right where I left her. I pointed at the door and said, "This door appeared, and I—" "What door?" she interrupted. I turned, and sure enough, the door was now gone. I explained what happened to her, but I left out the message that appeared on the screen. "You will lose her." Those words still burned in my brain. I tried to force them out. We drank water, ate granola, and then got moving again. Hallways, endless hallways. After a couple hours of walking, we started to hear music. There were small speakers in the corners of the ceiling. I recognized it as the same New Age music that played on the TV in the boardroom. The melody drilled into our minds. Combined with the dull aesthetics of the quiet hallways and the endless right turns, the music had a hypnotizing effect. The lengths of the halls became more uniform. That is to say, the straight section of hallway was about 7 paces, then a right turn, then 7 paces, and a right turn. "I think we're walking in circles, or a square," Mia said. I looked at her and took out a bottle of water. I peeled off the plastic label and dropped it on the floor. Then we kept walking. 7 paces, right turn. 7 paces, right turn. 7 paces, right turn. And there it was. Mia was right. The label from my water bottle lay in the middle of the hallway. Somehow, we had been led into a loop. I lost it. I kicked the wall repeatedly and screamed. Mia just leaned her back against the wall. This was our dynamic. If one of us lost it, the other became zen and thought of a solution. More often than not, I was the one to lose it. I finally stopped freaking out. "There has to be a way out." "A door," Mia said. "We would have seen it," I replied. "A hidden door," she said. She turned around and ran her hands along the cracks of the wood paneling. "Most likely on the outer wall," she said. She beat her fist on the wall, listening for a change in the sound. I exhaled heavily, sweating and tired, and I started searching the wall as well. We checked the whole first wall, nothing. We checked the second wall, nothing. The third, nothing. The final wall, nothing. I gave up and slumped on the floor. Mia immediately went over to the other side of the hall and started checking the inner wall. "What are you doing?" "I thought you said it would be on the outer wall." I asked. Then we heard it. Mia beat the wall, and instead of the dead thud, we heard a resonant boom. A door. I shot up and started tapping the wall with Mia until we found where the door ended. It was the width of about 4 wooden panels. I lined myself up in the center, lowered my shoulder, and pushed. It moved. It barely moved, but it was enough to confirm this actually was a door. I re-centered and tried again, lowering my center of gravity. I pushed as hard as I could. The door pushed inward about 3 inches. Then Mia joined in. We slowly moved the door, 5 inches, then 10, then 15, then 20. Then Mia slipped inside. I had a moment of panic as she disappeared into the darkness, and those haunting words came back into my mind. You will lose her. I darted past the doorway, falling through the threshold and hitting the concrete floor. I looked up, and there was Mia, thank God. I promised myself I'd never let her out of my sight again. The exit, Mia said. She looked and sounded as if she were 1,000 miles away. I got to my feet and followed her gaze. What I saw nearly brought me to tears. We were back in the tunnel, but there was light. About a mile down was the mouth of the tunnel, and daylight pouring in. Beautiful daylight. I grabbed Mia tight and kissed her. Thank God, she cried. We started moving. Nothing was going to slow us down this time. We sped up into a run down the maintenance walkway towards that beautiful sunlight. As we approached, something else came into view. Parked in the middle of the roadway was a large vehicle. It couldn't be. It was. Our RV sat in the road waiting for us. We ran all the way to it, pulled open the passenger side door, and climbed in. There were no mannequins to be seen. I fell into the driver's seat, and Mia handed me the keys. I turned over the engine, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I shifted into gear and floored it towards the sunlight. As we got closer, I could see the green of trees and the blue of the sky. We were maybe 100 yards away. I turned to Mia, tears in my eyes, and what I saw turned my blood to ice. Just beyond Mia's window, that horrifying pale face grinned at me. The pale-faced woman was somehow floating outside of the RV. Before I could say anything, her hand smashed through the window and gripped Mia by the throat. Then, in one horrible motion, the thing pulled Mia screaming through the window and disappeared. I slammed on the brakes just as the RV passed through the exit of the tunnel, and sunlight flooded the cab of the RV. I threw it in park and shot out of the door screaming, Mia! Mia! I screamed over and over. I rounded the front of the RV and looked back at the tunnel, and what I saw shattered my mind. The tunnel was gone. There was only open road. I had lost her. I was meeting up with a friend in the town of Sullen Oaks, but due to procrastination, I was running late. Sullen Oaks was a small town, but spread out. There were long stretches of road between neighborhoods, and they could be quite lonesome. It was such a stark contrast to the beautiful scenery, but the lack of lighting was downright unnerving. I didn't scare easily, though, and took it all in stride. That is, until I came to Tanner Bridge. Judging by looks alone, it was not an intimidating bridge. It was a simple wooden structure that crossed over a rather cold-looking river. Some voice within me began shouting for me to turn around. As I got closer, my intuition was tugging at my brain so hard that I actually stopped right before the bridge began. I kept scanning for any sign of danger or anything to explain this sense of foreboding, but found nothing. I scolded myself for being childish and stepped on the gas. Around a quarter of the way in, my car began to sputter. I muttered.
I filled up as soon as I got into town.
Checking my tank showed that I had plenty of gas. The car faded quickly and soon came to a dead stop. In denial, I tried turning the key 5 times, but the engine showed no sign of life. I queried aloud.
Engine failure?
Luckily for me, my dad was a mechanic, and I could figure out the problem from taking a quick look. With flashlight in hand, I exited the car and took a look under the hood. After checking over everything, I was shocked to find no signs of an issue. I had just tuned everything up, so there was no logical reason it would up and die like this. Exhaling slowly,
Huh?
I went back into the car and got my phone out to call my friend when my radio suddenly crackled to life. The hissing of the static made me jump, and I dropped my phone into that irritating space between the seats and the console.
Damn! Lost to the abyss.
I began messing with the knobs on the radio to turn it off, but nothing worked.
There shouldn't be any power to it, should there?
Feeling thoroughly creeped out, I jammed my hand into the space where my phone fell and began to feel around. Just as I was starting to get a hold of my phone, a voice came over the radio.
Where is she?
It was the voice of some woman I'd never heard before. The spacious echo of her voice instantly sent a shiver through me. She sounded sad and desperate, but even more so, she sounded unearthly. There was no way to properly explain it, but I immediately sensed that she didn't belong. And just as quickly as the strange things were happening, they stopped. I sat in a moment of silence with my phone in hand. After collecting myself, I called my friend and let her know that I was having car trouble.
Oh no! Do you know what's wrong with it?
I have no idea. The engine just died, but everything looks fine.
Huh, weird. If you don't know what's wrong, I doubt anyone else will. I'll come get you. Where are you at?
Tanner Bridge? Is something wrong with that? Hello? Okay, don't freak out. Just some weird electrical
The line was dead. At this, the sound of a loud splash demanded my attention. It wasn't a large frog or something like that. It had to be a good-sized rock, or maybe even... I said aloud.
Stop, don't do that.
Then again, if someone did jump off the bridge, shouldn't I check that they're okay? Fighting against my better instincts, I flung my door open and aimed my flashlight at the river below. I scanned for a ripple in the water to indicate the source of the splash, but the water was eerily calm. I murmured.
What the hell's going on with this place? No, it couldn't be.
Then I heard something that froze me dead in my tracks. It was the sound of a baby crying. At first, I thought it was coming from below the bridge, so I darted my flashlight around the surface. There was absolutely nothing to see. The sound moved in another direction, and I followed it with my light, but there was nothing there either. The sound changed yet again, and it was coming from everywhere all at once. It wasn't close, far, or anything in between. The sound of the baby's cry was just there. As suddenly as it started, the crying stopped. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in the eerie calm. Not knowing what else to do, I walked the short distance back to the entrance of the bridge and shined my light on the embankment for any sign of life. That was when I saw it. Muddy footprints trailed from the edge of the water to halfway up the embankment. I squinted my eyes to make sure I was seeing correctly. The prints were indeed there. Even stranger was the fact that they were fresh, and it hadn't been raining. Then, before my very eyes, I saw something I truly couldn't believe. A new footprint appeared in the mud, as if an invisible foot had pressed into it. I whispered in awe.
No freaking way!
Another print appeared, followed by another, making its way towards me. I turned on my heels back to my car. That's when the wailing started.
Where's my baby?
The awful, forlorn voice was the same woman I heard on my radio. This time, it was coming from behind me and much louder. The woman was panicked, pleading desperately. Her volume intensified, and by the time I dove into my car, the disembodied voice was screaming.
Help me! Where is she? Where's my baby?
I locked my doors, crawled into the back seat, and pulled a blanket over my head. The woman's voice approached the car, and I was trembling with fear. Just as the woman's shrieking rose to a fever pitch, it faded away. Daring to peek out from my blanket, I saw that there was nothing at my window. I sat up and tried to catch my breath. Once I was breathing normally again, I got into the front seat and tried calling my friend again. My friend was apparently ahead of the game. Blinding lights forced me to hold my hand up in defense. I opened the door with one hand and stepped out. My friend shouted from her car.
It's me! Come on!
As soon as I heard her voice, I bolted across the bridge. The sound of my shoes reverberating off the wood was a form of catharsis, making each step further away from the horror behind me. Or so I thought. Right as I was clearing the end of the bridge, something stopped me. I jerked backwards and felt a hand grip my arm. Daring to look behind me, I came face to face with the apparition of a bloodied woman with torn clothing and a bulging eye socket. Her neck was twisted in an unnatural angle, as if it had been broken.
Please help me!
The woman screamed into my face. I was paralyzed with fear, only able to marvel at her piercing, dead eyes. Another hand pulled me in the other direction, and I came to as my friend freed me from the woman's grasp. We both ran to her car as fast as we could manage. On the drive home, I recounted my harrowing tale to her. My friend explained that she booked it to the bridge as soon as I told her where I was. Apparently, there was an awful history attached to Tanner Bridge. 50-some odd years ago, a woman was admiring nature on the side of the bridge with her child. It was more of a scenic spot at the time, and there weren't as many cars driving in that area. A driver came across the bridge too fast and bumped into her, causing her to drop her child into a shallow area of the river below. In a panic to save her child, she leapt off the bridge and slammed into the ground near her child. She couldn't move due to her broken neck and could only call out in distress until she succumbed to her injuries and died. The driver that hit her was the only witness to the event and took off in fear. He didn't confess until years later. Apparently, he turned himself in out of sheer guilt. Many times, he found himself hanging around the bridge in some strange way of coping with what he'd done. He would hear the voice of the dying woman calling out for help, and the guilt became too much for him to bear. The story of the man's confession hit the local paper, and teenagers would soon hang out near the bridge at night to see if they could experience the ghostly activity. It didn't take long before all the local kids stopped coming because their experiences were simply too horrific for them to come back. As in my case, cars were known to die right on the bridge where the woman jumped to her death. My friend told me that Tanner Bridge was so notorious for paranormal activity that another bridge was built to avoid it. Only the locals knew about the story, so she didn't think to tell me. So if you ever decide to visit Sullen Oaks, make sure you know the way around Tanner Bridge. That is, unless you want an experience that will scar you for life. You wouldn't believe what happened to me last night. It still sends chills down my spine just thinking about it. It all started with the museum in the heart of the city, an imposing structure surrounded by the constant hum of traffic and skyscrapers. By day, it was a beacon of knowledge and beauty, but by night, it turned into something entirely different, a place where the past didn't just sit quietly in display cases, but reached out with ghostly fingers to grasp at the present. I should have listened to my friends. They warned me, told me to stay away, especially on a night like last night with a storm brewing on the horizon. But there was something about that museum, something that called to me, tugging at my curiosity like an insistent whisper. So, against my better judgment, I went. The moment I stepped inside, the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, sealing me in. The air was cold and stale, tinged with the musty scent of ancient relics. Each step I took echoed through the empty halls, amplifying the eerie silence. I swear, the painting's eyes followed me, and the statues seemed to murmur secrets I couldn't quite catch. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. It was like the past was alive, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I pressed on, my heart pounding harder with each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. It was in the Hall of Antiquities that I first felt the real chill of fear. The room was filled with artifacts, masks, idols, relics from forgotten civilizations. They seemed to pulse with a strange, malevolent energy. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were boring into me. Then, faintly at first, I heard it, a haunting melody that echoed through the halls. It was a sad, mournful tune, full of sorrow and longing, as if it were a lament for lost souls. Compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I followed the sound, my hand trembling as I reached for each corner. The song grew louder, more insistent. Then I saw it, a figure cloaked in darkness, barely more than a shadow among the shadows. Its features were obscured, but its presence was undeniable. I gasped, stumbling backward, my pulse racing. I tried to run, but my feet felt like lead. The figure moved effortlessly, gliding through the darkness, always just a step behind me. I could hear my own breath, ragged and desperate, mingling with the relentless melody. I don't know how long I ran, the corridors twisting and turning, leading me deeper into the labyrinth. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I burst into the main hall. The storm outside had reached its peak, lightning flashing and thunder roaring like an angry beast. With a final desperate burst of strength, I flung open the heavy doors and stumbled out into the raging storm. The cold rain on my skin was a shock, but it brought a rush of relief. I was out. I was safe. Or so I thought. As I fled into the city streets, the melody still echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of what I'd encountered. Even now, I can feel it. The darkness that touched me, the shadows that still cling to me. It's like a stain I can't wash away. I know deep down that the horrors of that museum will never truly let me go. The past reached out and claimed me last night, and no matter how far I run, I can't escape its grasp. My parents once lived and worked in a city along the southwestern coast of China. They rented an apartment near their workplace. At first, everything seemed perfect, but about a year after moving in, my dad began experiencing terrifying nightmares every night. My mom told me that he would often mumble incoherently in his sleep, his hands flailing as if battling some unseen force. He could never quite explain it, only that something was relentlessly pursuing him in these dreams. One particularly frightening night, he abruptly leaped out of bed, standing atop it and screaming while pointing into the darkness. My mom was terrified beyond words. Initially, I dismissed their stories as stress from work, but my mom insisted that during that time, whenever they entered the apartment, they would be confronted with a peculiar, damp wood scent. The strange part was that the apartment had almost no wooden furniture except for a wardrobe, and the weather was bone dry with no rain. My mom said it was the kind of smell often found in coffin stores. Not sure if it's a thing in the States, but in many East Asia folktales, the smell relates to spirit presence. The scent, the nightmares, the inexplicable fear. Something sinister was lurking in that apartment, and it had taken hold of my dad. What troubled them, even more, were the insects. Strange little creatures started appearing in every corner of the house, and even large centipedes. My mom is quite obsessive with clearness. She cleans the house 3 times a day and strictly controls the habits of basically everyone around her. So this situation was surely bizarre. I remember my dad even got bitten by a huge rat. Terrible. After all these happened, my mom started to wonder if it had something to do with Mr. Jang upstairs. He was an old friend of theirs, a devout Buddhist who was passionate about spreading his faith. My dad found him a bit much at first because Mr. Jang would constantly use frightening tales to dissuade him from eating meat, like accusing him of eating dead bodies. Mr. Jang would play Buddhist sutras at home, blasting them so loudly that they could be clearly heard in the stairwell down to the first floor. However, Mr. Jang was considerate enough to stop the chanting by 10 p.m. each night, resuming promptly at 8 a.m. the next morning. I guess this routine is noticeable but tolerable. The final straw that led them to move out happened when they brought back pineapple cakes from Taiwan, including a box for Mr. Jang. As they went upstairs to deliver it, they spotted a woman with long braided hair standing near the shoe cabinet in front of his apartment. She stood silently, not responding to their questions, while the loud Buddhist chants continued. When Mr. Jang's wife opened the door moments later, the woman had vanished in an instant. This eerie encounter, coupled with all the other strange occurrences, prompted my parents to make the immediate decision to leave that very day. It's quite intriguing that during that period, both my dad and Mr. Jang were experiencing significant business setbacks and bad luck. Meanwhile, the newlywed couple on the second floor ended up divorcing, with their fights escalating to the point where the entire building was aware of it. Shortly afterward, it became known that the landlord of the building had amassed substantial debts and had fled, leaving the tenants scattered. In the end, my parents moved to a new place far from that unsettling apartment. They never experienced the same nightmares, strange scents, or eerie encounters again. Looking back, they often wondered about the strange chain of events and the mysterious woman they had seen that day. It remained a curious and spine-chilling memory, reminding them that sometimes the unseen forces around us can impact our lives, whether we understand them or not. Jenna and I had always found solace on the open road. It was our shared sanctuary, a canvas of asphalt and landscapes where our worries dissolved in the rearview mirror. Every mile was a story, every destination a fresh start. This trip was meant to be just another chapter in our collection of weekend getaways, a simple drive down the scenic coast, camping under the stars with the promise of a seaside sunrise. We left the bustling cityscape on a bright Friday afternoon, our spirits high and our old Chevy bursting with gear. Jenna managed the playlist, a mix of classic rock and indie anthems that had become our unofficial road trip soundtrack. As the urban sprawl gave way to open fields and distant mountains, our conversation meandered from mundane work chatter to excited plans for the days ahead. Hours into our journey, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of pink and orange, we spotted a couple stranded by the roadside. Their car, an old sedan, had its hood propped open, emitting wisps of steam. They looked forlorn, thumbing for a lift, their faces etched with the fatigue of being stuck in such a desolate spot. "Should we help them?" Jenna asked, her hand pausing on the volume dial. "Let's stop. It could be us in their shoes," I replied, guided by that unwritten rule of the road that binds all travelers. We pulled over, rolling down the window to greet them. Their relief was palpable. "Thank you so much," the woman exclaimed as they approached. "I'm Lila, and this is Mark. Our car just decided today was a good day to die on us." After a brief exchange, we learned that they were also headed towards the coast. It seemed like fate, or at least a fortunate coincidence. They grabbed their bags from their car, just a couple of backpacks really, and squeezed into our back seat. With new companions, our journey resumed. Mark shared stories of their travels, each tale more adventurous than the last, while Lila chimed in with comments that brought laughter all around. The chemistry was instant, a bond formed by the shared love of the road and the tales it inspired. As darkness settled in, a dense fog began to roll across the landscape. The road ahead turned murky, our headlights struggling to slice through the thickening white blanket. Mark suggested a shortcut, a lesser-known logging road that cut through the woods and promised to shave off an hour from our trip. Hesitant but trusting, I turned off the main highway. The road was uneven, gravel crunching under our tires, flanked by towering pines that loomed over us like silent sentinels. The deeper we drove, the thicker the fog became, enveloping the car in a ghostly embrace. Lila grew quiet, her earlier vivacity replaced by a tense silence. She stared out the window, her brow furrowed as if listening to something beyond our hearing. Mark whispered to her occasionally, his voice too low for us to catch any words. The atmosphere inside the car shifted. The air turned cold, and an uncomfortable feeling settled over us. Jenna gripped my hand tighter. The radio, which had been playing softly in the background, began to crackle with static. Between bursts of harsh white noise, a faint whispering emerged, as if someone was speaking just out of the range of clarity. I glanced in the rearview mirror to ask Mark and Lila if they knew what might be causing the interference, but my heart nearly stopped when I saw the back seat was empty. Not just empty of Mark and Lila, but devoid of any sign they had ever been there. No backpacks, no water bottles, nothing. "Jenna, where did they go?" I stuttered, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to look, her face paling as she took in the empty seat. I don't know. They were just there." The whispering from the radio grew louder, now clearly distinguishable as voices. Not just any voices, Mark and Lila's. They were calling out to us, their tones twisted into something chilling, almost mocking. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as they said our names, urging us to come find them. panic surged through me. I floored the accelerator, desperate to put as much distance between us and whatever this nightmare was. The fog outside seemed to thicken in response, swirling around the car as if trying to slow us down. Suddenly, Jenna screamed, pointing ahead. Two figures stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by our headlights through the dense fog. It was Mark and Lila, or at least their shapes. But something was horribly wrong. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their smiles were too wide. The corners of their mouths stretched too far up their cheeks. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just feet away from them. The radio fell silent as we faced the figures in the road. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at us with those terrifying smiles. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with fear. Their smiles faded, replaced by expressions of mock sadness. "You didn't stay with us," Lila's figure said, her voice a distorted echo of her earlier, cheerful tone. "You left us behind," Mark's figure added, stepping closer to the car. The fog seemed to move with him, curling around his legs as if he were part of it. "We just wanted to share this place with you," Lila's figure said, moving forward to join Mark. "Now, you're a part of it forever." Before I could react, the figures vanished, melting into the fog as if they had never been there. I stared out into the night, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Jenna and I exchanged a look of sheer terror. Without a word, I threw the car into reverse, turning us around and speeding back toward the highway. The drive back was silent, both of us too shaken to speak. Every shadow in the fog looked like a figure waiting to emerge, and every whisper of wind sounded like a voice calling out. When we finally reached home, the sun was beginning to rise, casting weak light over a world that felt entirely different than it had the day before. We didn't talk about what happened, not wanting to make it any more real than it already was. But the memory of that night, the voices, the figures, their final words, lingered long after. Days turned into weeks, and although life slowly returned to normal, the experience stayed with us. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I'd hear whispers, faint and distant, like an echo of that night. Jenna and I never went on another night drive after that, and we avoided talking about Mark and Lila, as if mentioning them might bring them back into our lives. But the road, once a place of freedom and escape, now felt like a trap, a reminder that some things are better left undiscovered. When I got back last night, it was the same as always. The parking lot was full of cars, yet the place felt deserted. I had a hard time finding a spot close to my building, even though there were so many cars. I know people live here. I've seen the man with the box and Macy, but it's always eerily quiet, especially late at night, and it gives me chills the deeper I think about it. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, the echo of my footsteps the only sound in the stairwell. Inside, I tossed my keys onto the counter next to another key that had been bothering me. Trying to stay calm, I pushed it aside and covered it with a notebook. I needed a cigarette to unwind, so I headed out to the balcony, thinking it would be the end of my night. Leaning on the railing, I let the nicotine soothe me. Across the street, house lights were flicking off as people called it a night. As I finished my cigarette and stubbed it out in the overflowing ashtray, I noticed a stain on the rug from the coffee Macy spilled. It covered the spot where the box incident had left scratches on the concrete. Curious, I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to lift the rug and inspect the concrete. The scratches were gone, as if they had never been there. While I was puzzling over this, my phone buzzed with a text. My heart skipped a beat, and I almost dropped my phone. It was Macy. I hesitated before opening it. "Hey, I saw you get home," she wrote. How had she seen me? I'm always vigilant when I come home, and I hadn't seen her anywhere. Maybe her window faced the parking lot. Still, it seemed strange she would notice and text me right away. I wasn't sure if I should feel flattered or worried, especially given her last text that was still visible above this one. I decided to probe a bit. "Oh, hey, yay lol. I've been out with a friend all day," I replied, trying to sound casual and see if she would reveal anything. "Oh, fun. How was it?" she responded, unusually upbeat. "It was fun, yay. I'm a bit exhausted, haha," I replied, trying to avoid inviting her over. I was tired but also desperate for answers. I pressed on. "So how was your day? Anything interesting?" Hoping to draw out some information. "Yeah, I met a really nice guy in the building. He's cool, we should all hang out sometime." I knew exactly who she was talking about. Unable to stop myself, I asked, "Did he give you anything?" "Lol, yeah, actually, how'd you know?" "He left a box with a really nice note. It's locked, and I think he forgot the key." I looked at the key on my counter, still covered by the notebook. I had a bad feeling, but couldn't ignore it. Suddenly, I was startled by the sound of doors slamming open down the hallway. I peered out of my apartment to see every door wide open, each one pitch black inside. As I moved closer, hands began waving out from the doorways, then retreating and slamming the doors shut with angry knocks. This repeated all the way down the hall until I reached the last door, where Macy stood, facing away from me. She looked different, taller, with larger hands and broader shoulders. "Macy?" I called out. She turned slowly, her eyes familiar, but everything else about her unnerving. She smiled, a wide, unsettling grin. I backed away, and she stepped into the hallway, still smiling. I hurried back to my apartment and locked the door. The screaming started again, this time coming from down the hall, getting closer. I grabbed my gun, trembling. The scream stopped abruptly right outside my door. My phone vibrated. It was Macy. "Want to open it?" she had texted. I didn't reply. Instead, I stayed up all night, too terrified to sleep. I finally dozed off in the early morning. I'm writing this now, trying to process what happened. I've taken extra shifts to avoid going home, hoping a few nights away will help me figure out what to do next. Thanks for watching our video. Have you ever had a really scary experience? We want to hear about it. You can tell us in 2 ways. Option 1 is, write down what happened and email it to us. The email address is in the description below. We're excited to read your story and learn all about what happened. And the second option is, record your story using your phone's recording feature. Make sure the sound is good, with no background noise. We want to make sure everyone can hear your scary story clearly. Pick whichever option works best for you, and let's explore your spooky experiences together. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.